And just to say that we're also going to live stream to YouTube. For those who aren't able to, or maybe fall off due to connectivity issues, we are available on YouTube, and the recording is always available on the event page after the event, as is any additional information. So I'm going to just wait for a few minutes to allow people to join, but I'd like to welcome you to put in the chat function, let us know where you're from. And there's Farouk. Lovely to see you on board, Farouk. I'm just going to welcome everybody and just wait for everybody to join. So I'm not waiting anymore. Just hello and welcome to everyone. My name is Carolyn Chalmers, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Good Governance Academy. And today I'm delighted to be hosting our first event with Partnerships for Transparency, featuring the speakers that you see today. And it's going to be a wonderful, fabulous event today. It's been a long time in the making, and we're really grateful to have this event at last. As always, it's great to see, to have so much interest in this event, and it's nice to see so many returning guests. Please let us know where you're from in the chat window, and I hope that you are somewhere warmer and drier than here in Cape Town. I know Daniel's sitting in Washington, and it's very hot there. While people continue to join, I'll share some tips for those who are not familiar with Zoom. If you can't see the control panel on your screen, please press the Alt key, the Alt key on your keyboard. This will give you access to the chat box, the Q&A box, and the reaction buttons. And our speakers would love to see your reactions, so please make good use of these. Clap, laugh, however you would like to react to what's happening today. If you have any questions during the event, please use the questions, the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to ask these during the Q&A session later on. And please do feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts, experiences, and also to connect with each other. And we'll be sharing our own LinkedIn details with you in the chat function. For those who are not familiar with the Good Governance Academy, we are a non-profit organization that was established by Professor Mervyn King in 2019. We collaborate with universities, business schools, professional bodies, and other organizations all around the world to educate and empower leadership to uncover, address, and overcome critical business issues. We run regular webinars on current topics as a service to our growing community. And if you would like to see what we have planned, please head over to the events page, which I'll post a link in the chat now in the window below. I'd also like to encourage you to join our mailing list, and I'll add that link there too. And follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube and be kept of our forthcoming events. In addition to the webinars, we host colloquia twice a year, and these are high-profile events which have been attended by thousands of people. The output of these are shared with over 5 million professionals throughout our support member network. We also run showcase events to promote courses, which the Good Governance Academy has endorsed, and we host research discussion forums and other discussion forums. Please head over to our website and have a look. And this, with no further ado, I'd like to hand over to Farouk to introduce our guests today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you're based. My name is Farouk Iqbal. I am with the PTF, which stands for Partnership for Transparency Fund. This was started many years ago by some retirees from the World Bank and associated organizations to push for better governance in developing countries. We're very pleased to partner now with the Good Governance Academy, which Carolyn has just introduced or spoken a bit about. We have in the PTF been directly engaged in a number of projects, small projects, to improve governance in developing countries over the last 30 years or so. Some of these have led to lessons which we periodically share with the larger community interested in governance issues. Today, we're going to share information about the value of civil society monitoring in a hostile environment. This will be built around the case experience of a project in Argentina. There are two people who will present this experience or information on this study. The first is Daniel Ritchie, who is a senior, a co-founder actually of PTF. And he will present information of a broader nature about the issues at hand. After that, Ana Riviere, who was with a civil society organization in Argentina, which participated in this program, will present information about the specific experience in Argentina. So let me quickly give you information about the two speakers who are to come, and then I will invite them to start. So Dan Ritchie, he has been an international economic development expert going back 50 years or more. He started off with the Peace Corps and the USAID and eventually found his way to the World Bank, where he served for 30 years before retiring. But people like Dan rarely retire. As soon as he was out of the bank, he started work in related areas of economic development and started up with the PTF, which he helped establish a long time ago. Daniel is an expert now, one would say practical expert in the area of governance because of his long involvement with this area. Let me also say a little bit about Ana Riviere, who is presently working with the UNDP in Argentina, but before that was associated with the Poder Ciudadano, which is the CSO organization that was directly involved with PTF in the implementation of a project related to overseeing various procurement and information issues related to a COVID-19 project. That's all I'll say at this moment. Let me just turn the screen over now to Dan Ritchie so that he can start the presentation. Dan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Farouk. Thank you, Caroline. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation about the issue of corruption and the important value of citizen monitoring to fight corruption. I'm really pleased to be here with my colleague, Ana, from Poder Ciudadano in Argentina. We look forward to having a conversation with you all on this particular issue. Today, what I'd like to do at the beginning is talk about why corruption matters, how it can be confronted and combated, and then we will use a specific example from the Poder experience in Argentina to highlight some of the issues that we face. And of course, we want to hear from you about your own experiences after we've done our introduction. As Farouk has mentioned, I am a founder of the Partnership for Transparency, the international nonprofit that basically promotes transparency and accountability in government and fights corruption. We do this by supporting local civil society organizations which have to deal with issues of corruption every day in their lives, in local communities. And we have supported more than 250 projects in more than 50 countries over our 25 years of existence. And I'm pleased to say that 85% of those projects were deemed to have been successful, have achieved their objectives according to independent evaluation. So I think we can say that we know how citizen engagement can work and how important it is for the fight against corruption. As Farouk mentioned, I worked for the World Bank for 30 years, working on economic development and corruption issues. And then before that, I worked in Kenya as a Peace Corps volunteer, working with poor farmers who face corruption issues every day of their lives. So today, Ana and I would like to address three questions. First, why should we bother to fight about corruption? Now, after all, it's been with us forever, and it will always be with us. Secondly, why do we believe that civil society organizations, including business organizations and the media, have a crucial role to play in combating corruption? And third, in a world where governments are increasingly hostile to civil society, how can CSOs manage to remain effective? And I'm looking forward to hearing Anna in particular on that subject. But the first question is, why should we bother? Corruption, as you probably know, is usually defined as using a public position for private gain. It typically means accepting bribes or payments for decisions that affect procurement and employment, or demanding payment for services that should be provided for free, from teachers, from doctors, from policemen, from local office workers. Corruption has always been with us, either due to greed, which I guess is a human condition, or because of need, because sometimes you need extra funding to feed the family. It is a fact of life in many countries, as you all know. But corruption has significant consequences. It's been estimated that at the global level, corruption costs $2.6 trillion annually, are equal to about 5% of global GDP. And that's really significant. And I've been told that more money leaves Africa annually through corruption than comes to Africa through direct foreign investment and international aid assistance together. It deprives countries of critical development for infrastructure, water supply, schools, and hospitals, and it promotes shoddy work that deteriorates quickly. And it's the poor who suffer the most, as I'm sure many of you know. It's been estimated that poor families spend 5 or 6% of their income on bribes, much more than the non-poor. And I've just seen a survey from Nigeria, in which 25% of the respondents say they pay bribes on a regular basis to officials. That's 100 million people. But it doesn't have to be that way. So question number 2, what can be done to fight corruption? I think we can all agree that governments typically do not reform themselves. After all, many politicians and bureaucrats actually benefit from the system. In 1999, my boss, the president of the World Bank, James Wolfensohn, decried what he called the cancer of corruption, and he directed the World Bank to assist countries to develop policies, laws, and institutions to fight corruption. Things like anti-corruption agencies, Supreme Audit institutions, whistleblower laws, Freedom of Information Acts. And I think it's fair to say, from my own experience, that these efforts have generally failed. There were too many vested interests benefiting from the corrupt practices who found ways to circumvent the controls. I have a colleague, John Gatongo, who was the anti-corruption czar in Kenya, who taped ministers admitting to having accepted bribes. And when he made that information public, it was John Gatongo who had to leave the country under threat of violence. So impunity there was total impunity to steal. It seems clear that you cannot impose these measures from outside. The pressure has to come from within the country. We believe that it must come from the pressure of citizens and citizen groups to insist that governments be held accountable and responsible to abide by the rule of law. And by civil society organizations, we mean nonprofit organizations, business associations, labor unions, media groups, academic communities, and others who share a common purpose and value apart from government. These groups need to press government agencies to provide the services and spend the tax money for the purpose intended. We have seen in the PTF time and time again how citizens can monitor the performance of governments and hold them to account for gross inefficiency, fraud, and corruption. And Anna and I can give you multiple examples of the effectiveness of citizen oversight. So question number 3, how do CSOs deal with hostile environments? We should note that pressure from civil society can only be effective where there is at least a nominal level of respect and attention to citizen voice. In an increasing number of countries, as you know, governments are finding ways to limit the freedom of and effectiveness of civil society organizations. It may be by labeling them as foreign agents if they accept funds from abroad, restricting their activities for the things that they may be allowed to be engaged in, or imposing regulations that are much too onerous and burdensome. So how can CSOs be effective when the odds are against them are so great? We're going to use a specific example that Anna will present to you shortly of how a civil society organization tries to deal with a government that does not wish to be more open and transparent. And so I'll turn the floor over to Anna in just a second, but let me set the stage a little bit. In the year 2020, the COVID-19 epidemic burst out with remarkable speed and intensity around the world. The international medical, scientific, and financial community responded extremely quickly. Vaccines from multiple sources were available within months, and international financial institutions like the World Bank provided loans to countries for vaccines, medical equipment, and supplies very quickly, often by bypassing the traditional mechanisms for procurement and bypassing the financial controls that are typical for projects financed by the World Bank. In all, the World Bank provided more than $200 billion to 80 countries in less than 2 years. So the opportunities for fraud and corruption were enormous. Now, the Latin America and Caribbean region of the World Bank was particularly worried about the risks inherent in this kind of activity, given that the region has a very poor record on transparency and accountability. They recognize that independent third-party monitoring of procurement, storage, distribution, and delivery of vaccines could be add a very important level of protection. They asked us to develop a proposal. We in turn turned it to their Ciudadano to test out the value of third-party monitoring in Argentina in the specific case of vaccine procurement and delivery. So what happened? It turns out that there was serious resistance from almost every quarter. The Ministry of Health, always opaque and reluctant to share information, was even more closed. The major pharmaceutical manufacturers were insisted on keeping their contracts secret on both price and quantities. And the World Bank office didn't want to require a new approach in the time of crisis. So everybody was opposed. And so how did PODER respond? To tell that part of the story, I'm delighted to turn over the session to my friend and colleague, Anna. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm really glad being here. I'm going to turn for my document. I lost my document here. So, to address the different problems Daniel mentioned, it is clear there was no single answer. So, our advocacy model for strengthening integrity ecosystems aims to protect public goods from a human rights and integrity perspective, understanding the latter as the action, mechanisms, procedures of prevention, early detection, and avoidance of irregularities in this area. So we are based in four strategic pillars: ethical exercise of the public function, transparency and maximum disclosure of the acts of the administration or government, participation and social control of public management, and accountability. This intervention model aims to strengthen the entire anti-corruption value chain: prevention, detection, investigation, sanction, recovery of property, and reparation of the victims. That is why in these few minutes, I would like to tell you about this 5-tier strategy that we use as a civil society organization to fight against opacity and demand greater accountability. During the COVID-19 crisis, this was a roadmap for impact on public policies from the integrity and human rights perspective. First of all, monitoring institution, information gathering. This was the first decision that was made since there was little or no information available. As Dan mentioned, the purchasing processes floated the norm. Therefore, compliance with the transparency obligation, and specifically in the purchase of COVID-19 vaccines under the cloak of confidentiality clauses, almost nothing was published. Almost none information was available on how things were being purchased. The first thing was to know what was available and what wasn't. So Poder Ciudadano, the first thing to do was to mine all the websites available of the government agencies responsible for the procurement, international suppliers such as the PAO, funding agencies, other civil society organizations in other countries with more open information systems. And then, after mining all these websites, the strategy included a series of freedom of information requests on different matters. The answers varied on quality and quantity. So, for example, everything related on information on the contracts was really vague and almost non-existent, but information on distribution of the vaccines was pretty good. So it really varied on what we asked for. The objective was to unify and simplify information for citizens in general and facilitate the detection of alerts about incomplete, contradictory, or missing information. That regarding public procurement, but also we monitored other relevant issues, such as what we called in Latin America, the VIP vaccinations. So through public information requests, we were able to know the names of people who entered different public buildings, not being public officials, who benefited from the COVID-19 vaccine by passing the prioritization scheme. This scandal led to the resignation of the Minister of Health and also led to a judicial investigation. So all the information used that was given in the access to information request was provided also in the judicial investigations. Also, through freedom of information requests, we monitored the entry records to the official residence of the president. There was another scandal called the Olivos Gate, that it was related to the First Lady's birthday celebration in the middle of in a context of total isolation. This also led to a judicial investigation. So we can see through this different example why it is important to monitor and see what's going on and recollect information on what's going on. The second point is generate information or evidence as a condition for responsible and impactful advocacy. So from Poder Ciudadano, we created a website, an observatory. I'm going to show you the observatory as a second. Share. So this is our observatory. I'm sorry, it's in Spanish, but we had an observatory before the Ministry of Health. I'm going to show you now. This is the Ministry of Health Observatory, but we had it first. And also, one thing we have actually is the price of each vaccine, each doses from each brand in each province. So if you were giving an AstraZeneca, a CanSino, Moderna, and Sputnik, then you know how much money the country was spending on you regarding which vaccine was given to you. This information was reconstructed by serving information available in the website on the Ministry of Health that it's not available through freedom of information requests, but it's available through some documents that are published in the website. And then, so this was during most part of the pandemic, this was a unique website where people could know how much money was spent on vaccines and how vaccines were distributed around the country. Then the Ministry of Health launched their own observatory, so we could see how many vaccines were applicated to how many people, in what provinces. And finally, after a lot of freedom of information requests, after a lot of demands on the contracts, because still now we do not have the contracts, what the Ministry of Health published was this PDF document with some information of with whom they signed the contracts, in what date, on how much money, if they had the confidentiality terms, if they had resolution of conflicts. But this is the only information we have on the contracts. But this was thanks to the insistence of demanding information all the time. So that's, I lost my notes again. So that's on creating evidence. So with evidence, we can demand also more answers and create recommendations for the government. A third strategy, building networks. We cannot work alone. So Poder Ciudadano works systematically with other nonprofits, the media, the academic community, to build coalitions to demand more transparency and accountability in the COVID response. There is no doubt that the collective action is critical. As a complement to capitalizing on citizen participation spaces opened by the government or any public institution, it is necessary to generate alliances with different types of stakeholders to carry out the actions we intend to. So we generated alliances with different types of CSOs in Argentina, but also in Latin America. We had a really interesting workshop with 5 countries in Latin America, with the different difficulties and problems, with common problems we had in all our countries. So we then had a document of recommendations to restore the health of the immunization system in Latin America. So from the common problems, common solutions for the Latin American community. Also for raising awareness and for the technical evidence to reach people. So what I showed you before, it was really technical evidence on information. It is key to have interlocutors to translate it, to collaborate to disseminate that message to a greater number of people. So the role of the media is also key and critical. So that's another key network we had to work with all around the pandemic. Also, one of the things we had to fight through the pandemic, and also nowadays with the immunization situation in general with vaccines is to fight misinformation and disinformation. So the role of the media, it's really critical. So having key evidence translated and a good use of the media, it's really relevant. So next, engage constructively. This is mainly, it's really similar to creating networks, but it's related to with public institutions to promote the value of civil society engagement and public organization. So with the Ministry of Health, the Poder Ciudadano team work within the framework of the Open Government Partnership Action Plan on access to information and health services providers. So it's really important to also not only be demanding new spaces to collaborate, but also to take advantage of the spaces that already exist. But then the most relevant works I want to highlight are those done with the Supreme Audit institutions and with the Administrative Investigations Attorney's Office. So on the first hand, the General Audit Institution detected serious irregularities on the contracting to buy the COVID-19 vaccines made by the Ministry of Health. However, the majority of the auditors then declare the confidentiality of the reports, so we do not have access to the reports and see what were the irregularities, but the own Supreme Audit Institution detected this irregularity, so we know that there were problems in the purchases. So we know, so Poder Ciudadano was correct. So we are still, I'm gonna tell you in the last point, but we are still fighting to know what's going on in those reports. And finally, the first one I told you about, the gathering information, the construction of evidence. We did a lot of reports on the compliance, on the transparency obligations, on public procurement, and those reports were facilitated to the prosecutor's office. And the prosecutor's office used it as evidence to open a series of investigations on the compliance of the transparency obligations, and also to investigate some suspicious purchases. So they use what Poder Ciudadano did to open up some lines of research, and also a communication line was open. They shared all the public parts of the research of the judicial investigations that they were available. They also shared them with us. So it was a really interesting work. So last but not least, strategic litigation. When necessary, Poder Ciudadano challenged in court the resistance of the authorities to making public information public. So when all of the previous strategies have not worked, there is no choice to resort to justice. This is what happened, and it's what's happening with the access to information of the contracts for the COVID vaccines. We are still in litigation before the Supreme Court to determine the interpretation that the Ministry of Health made of the COVID vaccine law, since they interpreted the complete confidentiality of the contract, while we interpret the public nature of the contract and the inclusion of some confidentiality clauses. So this case started in 2021, and we appealed to the Supreme Court last month. So we're expecting a couple of years more to have a ruling, so we have to wait. Also, as I mentioned before, another case we have is against the Supreme Audit Institution that declared the confidentiality of the audit reports, pending resolution at the appeal court. In this case, there was not a freedom of information request in the middle. They just declared the confidentiality of the report. So we just asked the courts to order the non-confidentiality of the reports, since it's public information and relevant public interest information. So we have a lot of time in court. So as Dan mentioned also, to dialogue with a government that dialogues and acts accordingly, it's only possible in an ideal world. The reality, sorry about that. The reality is that it depends on the issue, on the circumstances, that a government can dialogue a lot, a little, or nothing. And the state of exceptionality generated by the pandemic made governments that were not very open to dialogue and accountability to flourish. Given the uncertainty of early 2020, risk monitoring strategies and surveys on what was published about government decision were initially adopted. This led to generate information and diagnosis with the purpose of transmitting the relevance of decisions and how public resources were being used in order to prevent and detect possible acts of corruption. In a world where democracies are increasingly fragile and capacities of governments to defend themselves from global attacks and abuses are becoming fewer, the key remedy is with citizenship and the central bond for mutual trust based on transparency. I hope I made myself clear and simplify our strategies on working in complex contexts. Thank you very much. Dan, the floor is yours. I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Ana. That was a terrific presentation, a very complex situation, and I think for their Ciudadano should have all our thanks for an effort, an extraordinary effort, which has its positive and negative consequences. Thank you. So what do we see as some of the important lessons from your experience and from other experiences? Let me mention 6 lessons that I draw from this, and then I would like to open the floor. So I want to hear about your own experiences from those who are participating today. The first lesson is that civil society organizations can and do make a difference, where the voice of citizens, as Ana says, can affect political decisions. The demands for greater transparency, accountability, and the curb on corruption can generate change. We may be seeing this even today in Kenya, where protests are focusing on corruption in government. And 91% of respondents to a recent survey have said the biggest single issue in Kenya is corruption. And there may be significant change as a result. The second lesson that Ana has also referred to is that the context matters. We see in the Argentina case that Poder could apply relevant laws like the Freedom of Information Act. There was an independent audit institution and a judiciary, and the electoral processes can affect outcomes in a country like Argentina. So the context is really important. The third lesson that I draw is, and Ana, I think it confirms, is that persistence matters. Social and behavioral change cannot be expected to be completed in the context, in a convenient time frame of a specific project, like the ones that the PTF supports. Poder has been involved in vaccine procurement for how many? 5 years, maybe longer? Yeah, and the battle never ends. And there's been a change of government in Argentina as well. So the situation is also confounded. So persistence is really important. The fourth lesson that I think I draw from this is that coalitions are critical. And Anna has mentioned the importance of the media and business associations, and individual CSOs are weak, governments are strong, but collectively, civil society organizations can actually make a difference. Fifth, and related to this is something that I feel very strongly about, is that the poor suffer the most from corruption. They're demonstrated that the poor and the most vulnerable populations were not necessarily the ones that got the vaccines by priority. And often the poor have to pay for basic services like health, education, and employment because they have no choice. And that's wrong. And finally, as Anna also mentioned, media is both a powerful tool and a curse. It can highlight malpractices and theft, but it can also spread disinformation that undermines the rule of law and the critical social welfare programs like vaccination. I understand from Anna, the vaccination rates in Argentina have declined considerably because of the misinformation that's been spread about the media. So actually we are working together to kind of see what organizations like Poder Ciudadano can do to restore faith in vaccinations. So these are some of the lessons that I think we draw, but I'd like to turn the floor over to you, our listeners, and get some of your own experiences. So let me hand the floor back to Farouk and Carolyn, and maybe you could serve as our moderator for the question and answer period.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I would like just to first turn to Carolyn and ask if at this stage she would like to step in with some comments or questions before we look at the questions that we have from the floor. Carolyn, would you mind?
Thank you. I just absolutely praise Anna on the tenacity, some would say maybe dog-headedness, that you just have to keep on going and going, and in the face of so much negativity and power struggles, and just amazing. And I think we see in South Africa at least quite a few whistleblowers who have similar experiences at an individual level, but to see this happen at an organizational level, just you just realize the extent of the efforts required by everyone. And I can't emphasize enough what Dan, you said about it takes everyone working together collectively. It's not just one organization. But Anna, thank you. What kept you guys going? What kept you carrying on, other than the good work and the good results? But there must have been dark days.
I strongly believe in what we do. We have great support from our sponsors. So it's a combination of stuff. We truly believe in what we do, so that keep us going. Like, for instance, the litigation, the strategic litigation, it takes years, but for us, it's one of the key strategies we do at Poder Ciudadano. It takes years, it takes 10 years. They recently gave us information from 2016, I think. But for us, it was a great win because they gave it to us. But it's believing in what we do, believing in what is good, believing in what we think is good in democratic institutions, strong institutions, what is good for Argentina, what is good for everyone. So that's what keeps us going, having good allies, working collectively. Last year, during the pandemic, we'd seen what collective work could do. So I think that gives an extra incentive to continue working together. So that it's believing, yeah.
what is your demographic makeup of your team? Is it old, young, previously disadvantaged people, or advantaged, privileged people from privileged backgrounds? What makes up your team?
We are a small team. We are 12 people.
Wow.
Yeah. Between the ages of 30 and 50. Different backgrounds. Well, I believe mostly privileged, I think. We all have higher education. Most of us have worked in civil society organizations.
Thank you. I think that gives a lovely insight into the team that's behind all of this work, and how you drove it forward. Thank you, Anna. I've got a question for Dan, for you. What got you to move towards this from the World Bank? What did you see at the World Bank that made it really important for you to do this?
Well, as I mentioned, I worked 30 years in the World Bank, and I was involved in agriculture and personnel. Every 3 or 4 years, I think they found out I didn't know what I was doing, so I got promoted into another job. But my last job was actually director of the World Bank program in North Africa, in Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. And I think on balance, the World Bank has made a significant contribution at the macroeconomic level. But what I always loved the most was when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, and I worked with about 1,500 really poor, illiterate farmers, helping them to settle on what was once European farmland. And I got so much satisfaction from working at the grassroots level. And I found that, some of the smartest, wisest people I ever met were illiterate African smallholder farmers. They were also the scoundrels, etc. But it really, it impacted my entire career at the World Bank. And I always have been we have been pushing the World Bank to recognize that civic engagement is really an essential part of good development business. So when I retired from the World Bank, I helped start the Partnership for Transparency, because I also recognized how important that the fight against corruption was, particularly for the poor. It's an organization that is now composed of about 30 or 40 volunteers, almost all of them retirees from the World Bank or the USAID or the Asian Development Bank. And so we are able to continue our work on development, but as volunteers. And so it's been a really satisfying experience to work with civil society organizations like Anna's, because they do the work. We are just basically a financier, and we help shape the projects, but the civil society groups do the work. And I have tremendous faith in the power and capacity of civil society organizations, provided they are given some space. And what worries me the most is that civil space is shrinking around the world, and authoritarian governments basically are depriving citizens of some basic freedom of speech. So I think this is a battle that's going to be going on continuously. But I'm aging out, and many of us we're looking forward to the next generation joining us. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to work for the Partnership of Transparency for free and actually make a big contribution to our budget, please feel free to call us.
Thank you, Daniel. Is there a role for the for-profit organizations in this initiative, in driving, I guess, obviously from a funding perspective, the call to action is there, but is there anything else that the private sector, the for-profit private sector, can do to assist?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah, well, let me start and then let Anna continue. We believe that the private sector, that most organizations, most companies want to compete on price and quality and not on bribery. They want to basically have a level playing field where they can compete with other businesses to win contracts and awards for goods and services. And consequently, it's in the interest of business associations and organizations to fight equally with nonprofit organizations to ensure transparency and accountability in government. Because, you know, what do governments do? They buy things. And 60 to 70% of their budget is on procurement of goods and services. So it's really essential for the private sector, if they want to compete fairly, to ensure that the people who are funding their goods and services also play by the rules, and the rule of law is honored. But Anna, you have a more direct relationship with the business sector, I think.
I was going to answer something similar, but it's also building a culture also of transparency within the business sector or the profit sector. A business, all the agenda of compliance helps of building this common ground agenda between civil society and profit organizations. We are starting to speak the same languages, so we want the same things. So we need to start working in these alliances together and working together. I think that's the place that we're going to. So before, I think there was like the public sector on one side, private sector on the other, and civil society on the other. And civil society demanding the public sector. But now, and then private sector interacting with public sector. But now they're interacting, but also civil society is also intervening. And they're all working together in an ecosystem. So I think that ecosystem is going to be rebuilding around compliance, about sustainability, about different common ground principles, and that's how we work together.
And it's very informal, isn't it? It's not formalized.
No, it's totally informal. It depends totally on the willingness on the company and on the government, on the public institutions. So that's why it's important for the private sector to demand also those levels of compliance, of integrity, of sustainability, everything. The private sector should also be a player in this integrity agenda.
Right. And here's a question thank you, Anna, for you, Farouk. It's from Justin Stein in the Q&A. Projects to change political culture extend beyond donor project funding cycles. Does this mean that civic education is more important or is important?
Great,
really
thank
important.
you. Well, why don't we just pass it on to the panelists so they can indicate how in their particular case, civic education turned out to be more or less important. Dan, Anna?
Yeah. Well, I can only say that it's vital that you have an informed citizenry. And, you know, Anna has mentioned the contribution that Poder Ciudadano has made by providing information which is relevant, which is honest, and which basically offers opportunities for citizens to be well informed about what's happening in their government. We also have been financing training for business associations on business ethics, and I think it's no less important that the business community demonstrate its integrity and its openness as much as the public sector. But an informed citizenry is absolutely essential for a democratic society.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that in civic education, it's really important that we continuously remind that participation is not only going to vote. participation, it's like everyday thing. It's an everyday thing. It's knowing what's going on. It's saying something if you see something it's wrong. If they try to bribe you, if you know something it's not being done correctly, it's saying something. So participation, it's so much more than just going to vote or the election year. So civic education, it's that, it's reminding, it's
It's consciousness.
it's consciousness, yes. So it's talking with our peers. It's not just something that matters to the public government, to the public authorities. It's something that matters with the private sector, with the profit sector, the non-profit sector, to individuals, to everyone. So we are all living in this together. So so civic education, civic engagement, civic participation, it's crucial. It's something that we should be teaching and enforcing in the good sense since we are little. So it's something that should be part of us. So yes, it's crucial.
Thank you, Anna.
It's not only being part with when something a scandal goes on, but in our daily lives.
Yeah, and may I add parenthetically that the technology for civic education has transformed dramatically what we have available now through various electronic, digital sort of media, has a tremendous power to reach people who may not have access to print media, for example, and so on. So it's we're living in a very different world than 20, 30 years ago, and the possibilities this opens up should be examined. And I think we will be doing something in a future seminar where we talk about how digital technology has been used to improve information for the public. Back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Farouk. And on that point, this is the first in a series of 3, right? So as you say, we're going to be talking about the digital side of things. Can you give us a bit of an insight in terms of what we're going to cover in the series?
The next two seminars have broadly to do with public procurement. In one case, emphasizing one of the lessons that came out of the Argentina case, which is building coalitions. And in another case, emphasizing what I've just mentioned, how digital platforms can be used or were used to improve information and transparency. One of the cases is concerned, studies public procurement in Moldova, and the other studies similar everything is related eventually to procurement. So procurement issues in Malawi. So these are the 2 next that are in line, and we're working on a 4th, but at the moment I have these 2 lined up.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Farouk. I don't have any more questions. If anyone else has any questions, please pop them in the chat function. But please do follow us on join the community, follow the Good Governance Academy event page, follow us on LinkedIn, on various social medias, on YouTube, and we would really like to welcome you back to the next episode and the next in the series with the Partnerships for Transparency Fund. And I'd like to say thank you very much to Anna for coming on board and sharing your story with us. It really was very insightful and motivating. And Dan, thank you so much for all the efforts you've put into this and to bring us this case study today and your insights on the 6 lessons. I'm certainly going to put them up on the website because those are really great takeaways. Thank you very much. And Farouk, thank you for arranging and organizing this. It certainly gives the Good Governance Academy a richness beyond just the governance aspects that we're talking about, but bringing to the private sector the ethics and the civil engagement that is required from everyone involved in society. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you.
joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you on the next one. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
We really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
you.